Good evening, Cedar Falls, and welcome to tonight's committee meeting. I will now call this meeting to order with a roll call from Madam Clerk.
Schultz.
Here.
DeBoer. Here. Cruz. Harding.
Here.
Ganfield.
Here.
Sayers.
Here.
Dunn.
Here.
Councilmember Cruz absent.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Tonight, we have three pieces to our committee meeting, starting off with the fiscal year 2023 audit report, and giving that is our City Treasurer, Lisa Roding.
Thank you, Councilmember Dunn, and good evening, Council, City staff, and the public. In your packet, as Ms. Dunn said, is your fiscal year 2023 annual comprehensive financial report. And the City of Cedar Falls' Finance and Business Operation Division prepares this annual report. It represents and reflects upon the city's financial operations and conditions to the city's residents, elected officials, management personnel, financial institutions, city bondholders, and rating agencies, as well as others that might be interested in the city's financial condition. Each year, the staff in finance and business operations spends approximately 800 hours preparing this annual report, and this process is completed by our director, Rodenbeck, our accountant, Paul Kokler, our finance technician, Kathy Niebergall, myself, as well as others in the financial services division. The annual report is presented in three sections. The first section is the introductory section, which includes the transmittal letter and the city's organizational chart. The second section is the financial section, which includes the auditor's opinion letter, the management and discussion analysis, and the financial statements. The final section is the statistical section, which includes some financial and demographic information, and some of those charts are presented in multi-year basis. The annual report is prepared with generally accepted accounting principles, and the financial statements have been audited by an independent public accounting firm. The city is required under Iowa Code to have our financials audited by an independent public accounting firm, and Eide Bailey LLC was engaged to complete this audit. In July, they came and they completed the preliminary field work. They returned in September to complete the final field work, and while they are here, they review and test quite a few items. They have given an unmodified or clean opinion with regards to the city's financial statements. An unmodified opinion is the best rendered statement or opinion that can be rendered on a financial statements. And our auditors have stated that the financial statements have been presented fairly in all material respects and with respect to the governmental activities and business type activities. Another portion of the audit that's included in this report is the single audit. And under the Single Audit Act of 1984, recipients who receive federal funding of $750,000 or more must have a single audit completed. The federal single audit objectives are to determine if the local government has complied with the requirements of the federal grants. Eide Bailey, as part of their audit, completed the federal single audit. They covered two components. They audited the city's internal controls, and they also reviewed our compliance with the grant requirements. Included in that single audit is a schedule of expenditures of federal awards, and on that schedule you will note that there are 14 grants that the city participated in federally, and those totaled just short of $2.9 million. Federal funding was received from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Department of Transportation, Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, and the U.S. Treasury. Our fiscal year 2022 annual comprehensive financial report was recognized by the Government Finance Officers Association, and we were awarded with a Certificate of Achievement in Excellence for Financial Reporting. This was the 33rd year to receive this award. We do plan to submit the fiscal year 2023 annual report to GFOA after tonight's meeting. As required by Iowa Code, we will also submit this to the State Auditor's Office, and we will upload it to the city's website. There is no action needed at committee meeting. However, this fiscal year 2023 annual comprehensive financial report is on the consent calendar tonight on the council agenda, and I ask that it be received and filed at that time. I'd like to thank the mayor, city council, city administrator, and the directors for their support in the city's goal to maintain excellence in our financial management. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from council?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask, is it 33 years running, or is that our 33rd time we've gotten this? over the
33 years running.
That's a fantastic achievement. That's cool.
Yep.
Any other questions, comments from council?
Just that it's impressive that, 800 hours went into this, and we can surmise it in 10 minutes, and we're all confident that, based on what we're seeing, this is the real deal. So thank you guys very much, Jennifer, and Paul, and Kathy, Lisa, all of you for that great work.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions, comments?
I guess just to clarify, if I may, when do we anticipate it being uploaded to the city web portal so that others can review the 160 plus pages?
It'll probably be
detail?
tomorrow.
Tomorrow, perfect. All right, excellent, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Director Roding. And I echo, we are lucky to have all you and all staff service to our city. So thank you so much. All right, that ends the Finance and Business Operations Committee, and we'll head on over to the Public Works Committee.
We were going to throw it to you.
Yeah,
Gil.
I know it. I was already.
I said to instead of at this time.
Thanks, David. All right. Call the Public Works Committee in session. We have two items. First item is Main Street, and the second is some one-ways on Royal and Searly. Appears our first speaker is Director Schrage. If you want to go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Chairman Schultz, City Council members. Tonight, we're going to provide you with a update on the RAISE grant as it's related to the Main Street reconstruction project. I will kick it off with a little bit of history, and then I will turn it over to Aaron Moniza with Foth Infrastructure to do a lot of the meat of the presentation. So most of you can recall that Main Street began only speaking in regards to the construction aspects of Main Street. It was introduced into the Iowa DOT letting in November of 2022. And what that means is basically to get in that letting cycle of November of 22, we would have had to start the submittal milestone dates in November of 2021, a full year in advance of that letting date. The current project schedule is April of this year, April 2023. It'll be 3 construction years through August of 2025. Most of the work to take place this year. Original contract cost was right at about $30 million, and that was in, the contract was awarded in December of 22. And some of you may recall this spring we had a cost-saving measures with the contract of approximately $2.8 million. So our current contract is just over $27 million, and Aaron will elaborate a little more on that as he goes through his slides. So I will turn it over to Aaron.
Thanks, Chase, and good evening, members of the council. Always a pleasure to speak with you here. And as Chase said, I'm going to take a few minutes here and some slides to kind of go through some information, provide an update here on where we're at with the RAISE grant. Chase kind of set the stage a little bit about where we came from, and what I'd like to focus on is kind of where we're at here today, and more importantly, where we can go from this point. So there's really two things here: the why and the what. The what is the RAISE grant, and the why is, well, why are we talking about that this evening? And I think I'll start with that first and foremost. Probably the easiest thing to start with is the city staff is always looking at ways to kind of help fund projects. And I think as we all know from the history here, we've seen an increase in construction costs. And so when we look at projects, we're always interested in ways to try to help fund that. And henceforth, that's the reason we're talking about the RAISE grant tonight. And so from a what perspective, just a quick overview on what the RAISE grant is, in case you're not familiar. But a couple years ago, when the federal government passed their infrastructure bill, or the IIJA, there was a significant increase in funding. A lot of that funding came via a variety of discretionary grant programs. The RAISE grant is one of those, and it's particularly focused on helping fund transportation infrastructure projects, and those projects which really provide equitable benefits in a number of areas, but particularly with multimodal connections and connectivity, environmental benefits, economic benefits, and of course safety benefits, of which we felt the Main Street project was a really good candidate. This grant program is very competitive, and the government lays out a set of merits or criteria of which they look at the projects and grade them accordingly. And they can be difficult to get. So for example, last year there was over 12,000 applications. Less than 2% of those were selected as candidates to receive RAISE grant funding. And so Main Street obviously was one of them, which is really great news. But so what I'd like to do now here is just take a few moments and talk again a little bit about where exactly we are in a little bit more detail, and also kind of about the application itself. As Chase said, if you recall here, back in November of 2022 is when we let the Main Street project for construction, on November 15th to be exact. 2 weeks after that, so on November 30th of 2022, that is when the federal government announced the 2023 round of funding for the RAISE grant, which means they released, they call it a NOFO, but basically what that is that's a notification that goes out to the public that says, hey, the RAISE grant funding program's open. We're going to be accepting applications. Here's the deadline, and here's the instructions on how to submit, and when the deadlines are, et cetera. So we found out about that, obviously, here kind of after we let the project for construction, and so which kind of put the Main Street project in a little bit of a unique situation. I will tell you that most often, folks that are going after this particular grant usually do that prior to construction. The primary reason being that most often they don't have the funding for the project and they need that to kind of move forward. Obviously, Main Street was in a little bit of a different situation. And so we kind of took a little bit of an unorthodox approach, if you will. Now, when we submitted the application, and so again, the notice came out at the end of November in 2022, and the applications were due at the end of February in 2023. And so when we submitted our application, the information that you see on the slide, kind of that top table, that will show you the information that was part of the original application. And what we did at that time, and this is again just part of some of the requirements of the application itself, is we estimate kind of the overall construction cost, and then we make estimates on, in the case of a multi-year project like Main Street, hey, these are the different, this is going to be the different costs per year. You can also see in there, there's kind of, if you look at kind of the top two rows, the first is the RAISE grant funding total. Now what that is that was the amount of funding that we requested in our application. And then the second row kind of shows our estimates on the matching funds. And there's kind of requirements on how much you can ask for, as well as kind of the percentage of matching funds that must be there. So as Chase mentioned here, kicking things off, so we submit our application there at the end of February, and then in March and April, we had discussions and implemented some strategies there with the contractor, if you recall, to kind of reduce the overall current contract amount for Main Street. And that was primarily achieved by adjusting some of the staging, and we actually moved some of the work from the second and third year into the first year. And so again, on the information on the slide, kind of that bottom table will kind of show you where we're currently at with the overall construction cost, as well as kind of how the different phases will cost here as we look through the next few years. Now remember, at this point, so again, here we are, we're kicking off our first year of construction, and we do not know anything about the grant at this point. So we haven't been notified that the grant's been selected. But we do know kind of what, like I said, this summarizes kind of where we're at with our financial estimates. All right, so now I'd like to kind of dive in a little bit on the implementation of the grant. So it's June of this year, and the city is notified that they've been selected for a RAISE grant, which is, again, great news. It's exciting, as I mentioned before. It is hard to get these grants. But one thing that is really important to note here is when you're notified that you've been selected for a grant, that doesn't actually obligate or allow us to spend any of the grant money towards the project at that time. What has to happen is the city and the FHWA have to enter into a grant agreement, and that grant agreement kind of outlines and kind of finalizes like the total amount of funding that'll be available, how that funding will be used, and some of the time frames. And that's actually the first step that has to happen here. And so when the city was notified in June, shortly thereafter, so kind of in July and August, the city and the FHWA have been in discussions as, okay, what is it going to look like to implement this RAISE grant here for the Main Street project, being that it's a project that's currently under construction. And so with a lot of discussions and help from the FHWA, also with actually some help from the contractor PCI and kind of help and understand the impact, what I'd like to do on this slide is just walk you through, like, this is basically where we are. So if the city chose to implement the RAISE grant, these are the things that we are going to have to do. And you'll kind of see some different numbers on here. We've tried to also estimate to the best of our abilities what some of those impacts will be to the project, both from a cost perspective as well as from a schedule perspective. So the first thing that we're going to have to do is actually cancel the existing construction contract that we have. And so what that means is, if you recall, the Main Street project, there was actually 4 phases to that project, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and it was broken out over 3 years. So phases 1 and 2 were to be constructed in 2023. Phase 3 was going to be in 2024, and phase 4 was going to be in 2025. So the first thing we have to do is cancel this existing contract. And basically what the feds are requiring us to do is kind of split this up into 2 separate projects. So we would finish phase 1 and 2, which again, that's what's been, excuse me, pardon me, that's what we've been working on this year. We'd finish that up, we'd close that contract, and then we have to do an entire separate project for phases 3 and 4. So that would be the first step. Now, there are associated costs by canceling a contract like this. And you can kind of see what that total is, and I'll get into a little bit more detail on that in just a moment. Now, the second thing is, if you remember from the previous slide, we had requested a RAISE grant amount of $10 million. What the feds are going to make available for this project is $5.8 million. And the main reason for that is really associated with the fact that we've actually done some more work here in this first year than we originally planned. So that's kind of the second thing to keep in mind. The third thing is as I mentioned previously, we've got to work on and pull together a grant agreement between the city and the FHWA. Why that's important is because it just takes time. If you look at last year, the 2022 raise grant cycle, those grant agreements some of those were taken up to a year to kind of work out between the FHWA and the local jurisdiction for the grant. And then the next thing we have to do, as I mentioned before, we have to treat this as like two separate projects. So now what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to take our existing Main Street project plans and specs and just split that out and create kind of a whole new separate set of bid documents. So plans and specs that cover just phase 3 and 4. And what we're going to have to do with that is we're going to have to kind of go back through the project development cycle for a project like this. So we're going to go through our environmental review. Like I said, we're going to have to create plans that have to get reviewed and approved. And then the other thing that we're going to have to do is we've got right-of-way agreements in place with all of the corridor property owners. And for those property owners that are in phases 3 and 4, because our current schedule is having construction done by the end of 2025, and with the raise grant impacts the schedule, we're going to have to go back and kind of renegotiate those agreements just for those property owners in phases 3 and 4. And there is estimates and kind of on the costs associated with doing these extra efforts. As you can see there on the slide, and I'll break that down in a little bit more detail here in just a moment. And then finally, we're going to have to rebid the project. And one thing to keep in mind when we split these up is, and again, this is another requirement of the raise grant, is we're going to have to fully, quote unquote, federalize the new project, which basically means that there's a number of federal requirements that will have to apply to this project, by using the raise grant funds. And those are, you can kind of see that listed on the slide, but there's certain wage rates that will have to be part of the project. There's some disadvantaged business requirements. There's some material procurement requirements. And a good rule of thumb is that, generally speaking, if you compare a locally let project to a project that's fully federalized, a fully federalized project costs 10% more than a locally let project as a rule of thumb. Now there'll also be some additional administration costs from the city's perspective for the grant. And really what that means is as part of the grant agreement, usually the FHWA is going to require the city, there's basically some paperwork and kind of documentation that'll be required of the city to do throughout the course of construction here in exchange for using the raise grant. And then finally, from a schedule perspective, if you kind of roll this all up and look at some of the things that we have to do in our best estimates of timing, we'd be looking at letting a project and having construction occur in 2026 in 2027. So now I mentioned a couple of the costs before, and so I wanted to basically, the purpose of this slide is, this is really just to try to do a simple financial equation, if you will. And as Chase mentioned earlier, today, we have an existing project that's just over 27 million. And so what we're trying to show here is if we implemented the raise grant and kind of incorporating some of the additional costs that I just walked through, there's kind of 3 buckets that I mentioned, and I just want to kind of show how this is summarized here on the slide. The first is canceling our existing contract, which is kind of that top bucket, if you will, that's kind of got the yellow banner. Basically what that shows you is here's about how much we plan to spend to kind of finish the work that's already underway. And as I mentioned, to cancel the contract, there's costs associated with doing that, from materials that the contractor has to return and some other cancellation costs that we would have to pay. And you can see that we've estimated to the best of our ability what that would be, and kind of henceforth what kind of the phase 1 and 2 project would end up costing. The second bucket is the project development costs that I mentioned. So having to redo the plans, having to redo the right-of-way agreements, and the estimate on what that effort would be. And then finally, the kind of bottom area kind of shows the new project that we would have to let, or the project for phases 3 and 4. And we've estimated, we have a good idea on the amount of work left. We've estimated what we think that bid price would be. Again, we're looking out a couple, 2+ years at this point, so we're doing our best to kind of understand what the market might be. And then you can see those administrative costs in there. And so when you kind of add all that up, we get to a total project cost of just over $33 million. But we can apply the RAISE grant. That's the $5.8 million. And then you can see where we end up here. We end up for a total project cost at $27,250,000, which essentially is slightly above where we're currently at today. Now, the other thing I'll mention is kind of off to the right of the slide, you'll see kind of a range. We did some sensitivity analysis because, again, as I mentioned, we're doing our best to estimate some of these costs with our best judgment. And so we kind of looked at some things, being conservative, a little less conservative, and basically you can kind of see the range up there on where we ended up with whether there's kind of a financial benefit or not here with implementing the RAISE grant. And really, like I said, essentially, from a financial benefit, we really don't gain a lot, or there doesn't seem to be a lot to be gained from implementing the RAISE grant. And then finally, as we've mentioned a couple times already, just to show you, this again is kind of where we're at today with the current contract and our schedule. So again, we've just finished phases 1 and 2. If we stay with our current contract, we'll finish phase 3 next year. We'll finish phase 4 in 2025, on schedule to wrap up the entire project there by the end of 2025. And you can see that we're currently under contract for $27,150,000. So that's my summary of kind of what the if we implement the RAISE grant, what that looks like compared to our current contract. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Chase, and he's going to summarize.
So I know there was a lot of information provided to you tonight. So in summary, basically, to implement the grant, we obviously need to rebid the project, phases 3 and 4, which basically will federalize the contract, likely delay construction to 2026 through 2027. And then there's still a lot of unknown risks due to the bidding market and things of that nature, pushing the project out that far. So at this point, we haven't, in discussions with the FHWA and the Iowa DOT, we haven't found that there's a lot of benefit in pursuing this. So at this time, I think we're continuing to move forward with our current construction contract unless directed otherwise. As we move forward with it, I know we'll still keep our eyes open for any other opportunities that may arise. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions for Aaron or I.
Well, I'll start off before I start raising hands. So it appears that the bureaucracy of the way this is doled out, where actually could spend, was that $100,000 in red just to differential color, or could we be a deficit of $100,000 up to spending $300,000 more?
That is correct. The red on the slide, I put the slide back up here. There is some potential for a deficit or costing the city additional funds to do so. And one of the largest contributors to that will be obviously unknown bid prices from 2 years from now, but cancellation costs of existing contract. That continually goes up day by day. Contractors eligible for cancellation costs The heavy bidding market is November and December. So right now, a lot of the contractors, subcontractors are put in a position right now to potentially lose out on all next year's work if their contract gets canceled.
Questions?
Mr. Chair?
Was that Dustin or Simon?
Yes, sir. I just wanted to double check on the phases 1 and 2, the items that were accomplished in this year. Were those items from phases 2 and 3, or were those additional expenditures that were unforeseen?
You're referring to how we basically went from 12 million to 6 million in the construction year? That was
16.
same type of work, just moving phases. So they came
Okay.
from phases 3 and 4 into.
So it wasn't additional costs?
Correct.
Per se, okay. That makes sense. I mean, there's a little bit of frustration with this project because it was very expensive to begin with, and I'm not inclined to make it more expensive. So I'm trying to wrap my head around all this. It sounds like obviously it's pretty heavy-handed with the recommendation to let it go.
Simon?
Yeah, I mean, kind of, it was like, yay, we got a grant. Now we don't have one. So not fun to hear that. I mean, we do have one still, but not fun with the implementation and the federalization of it. So I'm conservatively would say, let's just stick out with where we're at. We did get lucky and save the 2.45 or whatever million it was in this year. And there's a chance that, like you guys said, you're still looking for other stuff. We could save some more, but I don't want to take the risk and push the project out 2 more years and let it, and then maybe to save 100,000, maybe to spend a lot more. So I just say continue course.
Susan?
I realize the raise grants are done by project base, but since this is actually split to 2 different projects, it's kind of a new project. Can the raise grant be used for any other project other than Main Street? Or absolutely not?
No.
Maybe since they had a surplus of money now, that they could just
Yeah, absolutely.
reallocate it for some other project.
Honestly, yes. Great question. We would like that if it's possible, but yeah, unfortunately, it's just for Main Street.
Okay. Other questions? Comments? Okay. Do we need to make a motion or a vote on this, or this is information? And
Right now, we're just going to continue course with completing the phases 1 through 4 under the current contract to be done in 2025. So I wasn't really looking for any motion. So.
okay. Well, thank you very much. It's again disappointing on how some of this stuff can get caught up in the bureaucracy, but not going to get caught up with it. Just
Throw in a question real quick.
yeah, Mr. Cruz, and then Susan.
With what looks like pretty nice weather in the 10-day forecast, are we just finishing up certain things you've designated probably 6 weeks ago? You're not going to like keep doing some more sidewalks because of nice weather to make up for the fact that
The contractor's actually here, but I'll try to answer that. So everything that's opened up right now, opened up under construction, will be tidied up for the winter and put back and to have the roadway open. But any new pavement removal or things of that nature, continuing the limits, that's all completed. So what's torn out right now, that's the limits for this year.
so if we miraculously have 50 degrees until Christmas, then he's going to finish what he's, like you just mentioned, and not start anything new.
Correct, yep.
Okay, I figured that'd be the case.
Okay, Susan, some last?
No, that covered it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Chase. And our next item up for Public Works is Royal Drive and Searly Boulevard one-ways. And Mr. Wiki is up.
Okay, good evening, Mr. Chair, council members, staff. Tonight before you, I'll be presenting East Searly Boulevard, Royal Drive, one-way to two-way conversion study that we conducted. This was a council referral item that actually was discussed last year at goal setting. And at that time, it was voted on by the council members to have staff to further investigate this and do a full study on a possible two-way to one-way conversion. Just a little bit of background on these two streets. East Searly Boulevard, Royal Boulevard are both one-way traffic. On East Searly, it's one-way westerly from Melrose to Royal Drive. It's a 31-foot back-to-back pavement section with asphalt overlay. It's posted 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. There are sidewalks on both sides of the street on East Searly Boulevard. There's also sharrows on both sides of the street of East Searly. On Royal Drive, that's one-way traffic northerly from East Searly up to Melrose Drive. That's also a 31-foot back-to-back concrete curb section, 25-mile-an-hour speed limits, no sidewalks on that section of Royal Drive. Here is just a quick video, kind of shows you some of the traffic pattern. I'll let this play and kind of talk through some of it. As you can see, this is Searly Boulevard here, and you can see that traffic is parked on both sides of Searly on the direction of the traffic. Most of those parked vehicles are to pick up and drop off children at the daycare center right across the street there. That's a pretty big daycare center. Have lots of students there, and you can kind of see the pattern there. Continuing one way on Searly, I think that one vehicle ends up turning on Royal and going north on Royal. But that's yeah, just a quick drone footage, kind of show you some of the traffic patterns there. So what we want to do is we kind of wanted to gauge the public interest on a possible conversion. So what we did is we sent out this postcard, and this postcard was kind of twofold. First, it was to announce a public information meeting that we had scheduled for July this year. And in addition to that, that QR code would take people that wanted to take the survey, just scan that QR code and it'd take them straight to the survey. We sent these postcards out to the residents that were adjacent to those corridors on Searly and Royal. End up being 43 property owners altogether that we sent those out to. So out of those 43 cards that we sent out, we got a total of 37 respondents that responded to the survey, and you can you see there, that's, I'll go through each one of these questions that we asked, but, you know, we asked the question, if East Searly, if you would be in favor of a one-way to two-way conversion, 86% said they were not in favor of the conversion. Same with Royal Drive. We asked if you'd be in favor of a possible conversion from a one-way to a two-way, and 69% of the respondents said they were not in favor of that. Then we asked some other questions that related to safety and maintenance and operations of the corridors. We asked if anybody had witnessed wrong-way directional traffic. 76% said they had witnessed wrong-way traffic on either one of those corridors. But then we asked, you know, if you witnessed any accidents. We only had 5% that said they had witnessed an accident. I went and we looked at 10 years of traffic accident data, and out of those 10 years, there was really only one accident, and that was at the corner of Royal and Searly, and it had to do with a bus rounding the corner and actually just running over somebody's foot that was stuck out in the pavement. So that was the only recorded accident that we had over the last 10 years. The other questions related to garbage pickup and refuse pickup. Asked if, you know, if those operations and snow plowing operations would be improved at all, if that would change their opinion one way or another on a possible conversion. And you see there that the results are 95% for each, that they said it wouldn't impact their opinion on how they feel as currently being in favor of remaining in one way. So at the public information meeting, we did an overview of the survey and we discussed the results. We had an open dialogue debating the pros and the cons, the fors and against. There were some concerns on Royal Drive at the curve. Most people that were in the attendance there were pretty passionately opposed to any type of conversion to a two-way. Most people cited a potential safety issue as related to picking up and dropping off their kids at that daycare. They're worried about parking on the far side of the street and kids darting in and out of traffic trying to cross that street. So that was the kind of the main discussion points from that public information meeting. So, in totality, taking all this information and the strong opposition and, not really having any accidents to speak of, at this time, staff recommends just leaving the corridors as they are at this time, leaving them one way. There doesn't seem to be a big benefit to changing them to a two-way street at this time. So with that, I'll entertain any questions.
Mr. Wiki, just for clarification before I go around the table here, that questionnaire that you sent out to the folks at Royal and the ones at Searly, were they each asked that question singularly, directly? If they lived on Searly, was their question only on Searly, or was it pertaining to Searly and Royal, and the same with Royal?
It pertained to both streets.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Chairman
Ms. Dunn.
Schultz? Okay, so I was the one that asked for this to be considered by council at goal setting, and I thank this body for allowing the conversation to happen and the work to be done. I thank staff for doing the work. I was at obviously I got the postcard. I live on Royal Drive. Obviously my perception as a neighbor is not the same as the people who live on my street and Searly Boulevard, and they made that known at the public informational meeting. But anyway, I respect staff's work, I respect their recommendation, and I just wanted to say that I appreciate this body letting the work be done and staff doing the work.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah, none. Again, is there any action, Mr. Wiki, you're looking for us, or?
No action, just as providing the information.
Okay. With that, we'll close out Public Works and turn it over to Community Development Committee.
Well, welcome. And we are here with Community Development Committee now. And we're going to talk about the College Hill Area Zoning Districts Review. And before we get into a conversation, I believe we have a presentation from Ms. Karen Howard.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, this was a referral from council at the last meeting to review the current R4 and C3 zoning districts in the College Hill area and how those relate to the visioning plan for those areas. So this is just the zoning map for the area. You can see here those zoning districts, and also we included the College Hill overlay district because that does significantly change the R3 or R4 and C3 district standards, which I will describe in just a moment. So the C3 commercial district is our most intensive commercial district we have in the city. It has almost all permitted uses other than the most intensive industrial uses. It allows all types of commercial uses, including auto repair, tire shops, warehousing, lumber yards, so pretty intensive uses. It also allows residential uses with the approval from the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council, and that's similar to a lot of our commercial zones require P&Z and council approval. The dimensional standards, there's really no minimum lot area, lot width, front or rear setbacks for commercial uses. The building height is a little unusual here. It's basically 3 times the width of the fronting street, or 165 feet, whichever is greater. So that's approximately about a 15-story building. We don't really have any private buildings in the city, Cedar Falls, that are that tall. So it is a height limit that's not ever been reached in the private market. with residential buildings, it's basically the same standards apply in the R4 district. And we'll talk about that in just a moment, so you can see how the residential standards would be the same in both the C3 and the R4 district. I did want to mention the College Hill overlay because it does substantially change what's allowed in the C3 district on College Hill. There are special definitions you can see in that overlay. The overlay section in the zoning ordinances is a number of different pages. I've just mentioned a couple things here. They have these special definitions in the code because they help to determine some of the standards and how they're applied. It does restrict and prohibit many of those most intensive commercial uses that I mentioned, and because the College Hill Business District is really what you see right there next to UNI, and it was determined that those weren't really appropriate uses in that area. It requires site plan and design review through P&Z and City Council for any substantial improvement to properties in the College Hill overlay, and that includes almost every change to properties where there's any kind of structural change to a building, or if they're expanding a parking lot, changing their driveways, et cetera, requires P&Z and council review. Now, what it does say in the business district section of the College Hill overlay is that it's really intended for that small area to be really focused on making sure the ground floor is commercial. 100% residential buildings just in that storefront area are discouraged, but it does say it allows residential above the commercial, so has a definition for a mixed-use building, and it has specific form-based standards in the code for that. And that's currently, and when I say form-based code standards, what I mean is the form of the building and the placement of the building on the lot are regulated in that College Hill overlay. There are special parking standards that apply in this area. No parking is required for the non-residential uses. That was similar to what we had in the downtown area. So for commercial uses, there's no parking required. For residential uses within mixed-use buildings, there was an amendment in 2019 that we did because it was a really vague standard and there was a lot of confusion about what was allowed. So we did an amendment to clarify that. So currently, the parking requirement is 1 space per bedroom, not less than 1 per unit, and there's exemptions for buildings that were constructed prior to 2019 when that code amendment was passed, and for the conversion of upper floor space in those that small area where you would have upper floor space in the existing buildings. The height standard is then modified in the College Hill overlay. Instead of the 165 feet, it basically says it should be of comparable scale and character as other buildings in the area. So kind of a vague standard, so not very definitive, but it does modify that C3 standard to some extent. Moving on to the R4 residence district, that is the city's highest intensity residential district in the city. And you can see on the map here on the screen here, you can see that the two R4 areas kind of flank that C3 district to the north and to the south, with UNI campus to the west. The permitted uses in the R4 district are basically all types of residential uses, everything from single family to multifamily. It allows institutional uses such as churches and schools, and it is unique amongst the residential districts. In the traditional zones, it does allow some commercial uses that allows basically professional offices and personal services. The dimensional standards really vary depending on what type of uses there on the site, and it is also on the height of the building. So, for example, for a residential density for a multifamily building, it requires 850 square feet of lot area per unit for a building that's 3 stories tall. And then if it's taller than that, it's 400 square feet, 50 square feet of lot area for every unit of 4 stories or more. So it's a little bit of complicated formula there. But basically, what's interesting is that the building height is really limited to 3 stories or 45 feet. So most of the time you don't get a 4-story building or above. That's only would apply if you have a very large site and you're setting your building back more than the typical setback requires. So with regard to those setbacks, the minimum front setback is 20 feet. Side setbacks are based on the type of building it is. So for the larger multifamily buildings, it's a little bit larger side setback. For single family and duplex, it's 10% of the lot width. So for the smaller lot, for those uses, it would be a smaller setback. The rear setbacks for single family and duplexes are 30 feet, and multifamily is again a little bit larger rear setback. So again, the R4 districts in these locations are in the College Hill overlay, so those same special definitions apply. And again, site plan and design review is required through P&Z and Council for any substantial improvements to the sites. The parking requirements are a little bit different here though. In 2019, when we reviewed those parking requirements, it was decided, the City Council at the time decided they just wanted special parking requirements for the C3 district area. And so everything outside of that in the College Hill overlay, including these R4 areas and the R3 areas next door, have the same parking requirements as required citywide. So every R4 district in the city would have the same parking requirements. So they are a bit higher. For studio and 1-bedroom apartments, it's 2 spaces per unit. And there's 1 space for every additional bedroom. And for multifamily greater than 4 units, it requires visitor parking as well. For commercial, it's also the same as all of the other commercial zones in the city, the traditional zones, except for, of course, downtown. So for example, an office use would require 1 space per 300 square feet of floor area. So those are parking requirements in the R4 district as they would apply. And then there's also some distinct landscaping requirements in the College Hill overlay that apply as well. So the council also asked, how do these particular zones then relate to the College Hill Vision Plan? So what we tried to do here is to overlay the vision plan, those districts we talked about last time, the character districts 1, 2, and 3. I think a number of people ask about those. So we included those on the slide here. The heart of College Hill, the red area, of course, is the storefront area there along the main College Hill, what we think about the College Hill Business District. The code, or the plan, says the goal for that area is to fill that gap between the upper and lower hill with shopfront buildings, more usable public open spaces, wider sidewalks, more street trees, improved pedestrian crossings. And I think that is similar to the goals that were in place in the College Hill Vision Plan that was adopted prior to the current vision plan, that there's always been a long history of wanting to fill in that gap between the upper and lower hill. And then the general College Hill, the orange area C to the west, that is largely zoned R3, but that is area that's right next to the campus between 20th and 23rd Street. It talks about allowing opportunities for more intense student residential in those areas. So you're right next to campus, maybe maximum 4 to 5 stories. It talks about not encouraging retail or expansion of the commercial district to the west, as focusing that commercial and trying to fill in that gap between the upper and lower hill, and then focusing maybe on more intense residential to the west. That's then supported by UNI. And then the blue area is the area surrounding, and that includes that R4 area and some of the R3 areas and a little bit of the R2 in that area, that surrounds basically those central intense areas. And the goals in the plan are primarily residential neighborhood transitioning between those more intense areas and the lower density residential neighborhoods that surround the central area. And the plan really calls for appropriately scaled residential infill, meaning scaled according to what those neighborhoods are today. So lower scaled residential in those areas, transitioning to basically single family and duplex further to the east and north. There are some challenges, of course, noted in the vision plan. Talks about the confusing and vague zoning standards. So it calls for adopting more clear and objective standards. It notes the lengthy review process for almost every project in the College Hill overlay. And the hope was that with more objective standards, perhaps some of those reviews could be done more administratively. They note the high parking requirements because of the small size of the lots and the fact that this is an infill area. Those requirements really are preventing redevelopment near campus. The plan recommends exploring creative parking solutions. It notes the need for parking, but talks about really needing to explore those creative parking solutions, maybe considering allowing some parking to be located nearby but off-site, so those smaller properties have some potential for redevelopment. And then also the plan notes, similar to how the College Hill parking study noted this as well, is that there's conflicting parking policies between the city's parking policies and UNI parking policies, so the plan calls for better coordination between UNI and the city. For the College Hill Business District, the plan does note the small lots, and I note that some of those lots along that stretch are split, and so not even the entire lot is zoned C3. Some are partly zoned R4, so it makes it really challenging for any kind of redevelopment to occur between that upper and lower hill. The plan also notes that disconnected business district and the lack of diversity of businesses. A number of the public that participated really talked about wanting more of a diversity of businesses on the hill. We've heard, of course, some concern expressed about the concentration of vape and smoke shops and liquor stores, and maybe how those might be discouraging investment from other types of businesses, and a concern about that. The market study that was done during the vision plan indicated that the business district needs a larger base of retail customers, basically to support a larger number of stores and a greater diversity of businesses. The marketing study also noted that retailers would benefit from more of a seamless connection between that upper and lower hill, so that there's more there, basically, for people to attract people to come, similar to how people come downtown when you can walk all along Main Street downtown. And there's a number of connected blocks where there's more places to shop and things to do. And then the plan also talked a lot about Dry Run Creek being a major feature in this area, and recommends thinking about the creek corridor as more of an asset. We've done some of that with our recent project there at Pedersen Plaza. Maybe even thinking broader that and thinking about some sort of a bike route along the creek. And then, because it's hard to tell the chicken or the egg here, what happens first and how you can jumpstart more investment in that area. So it talks about whether there could be some improvement to those public spaces along the streets that would be a catalyst for private investment then. And then, as you recall, in the plan, that's how they had those images of improving the streetscape and how that could transform the look and the feel of the College Hill Business District as time went on. So potential next steps. At goal setting, council could determine a scope of work if you choose, and address funding for a project in this area. And the process would follow something similar to what we did downtown, would be draft and send out an RFP for consultant services, and then a consultant contract would be approved by the city council, and then staff would work with that consultant and draft those new regulations and policies to implement the vision. And then that draft would be made available to the stakeholders, businesses, College Hill Partnership, UNI, similar to what we did downtown, and then have a presentation, a public rollout of that draft, so that there would be ample time for people to comment and make suggestions for any changes. We would anticipate that the Planning and Zoning Commission would have a number of work sessions to really understand what's being proposed, and then would have a number of public hearings at the Planning and Zoning Commission so they could review all those public comments and make any changes before it's sent on to council. And then, of course, council committee meetings and public hearings would follow, before adoption. So that process is likely to take at least a year if we were going to do a substantial changes to the zoning in that area. So with that, I'd just be happy to answer any questions that you have about the current zoning or anything else here in the plan.
All right, thank you. Open it up to council for questions. Councilmember DeBur.
Well, it really sounds like the overlay added a lot of the restrictions that they had wanted back in, with the exception of that change of that zoning line that you talked about on College Street, like from the 2012 to the 2024. I don't know why the zoning line would be like in the middle of the back of those people's properties. Why wasn't the zoning line at the back of all those properties when it was platted?
So this is a really old part of the city, of course, and I'm not sure how the zoning boundaries got in the place they are.
Well, how hard is it to move that to either, it looks like it's really used more for the C3 than it is for the R4, but how hard would it have been to actually move that line? Because it looks like the back of those properties are all in line with one another. Is that a lot of work?
So the properties could be rezoned, and of course, all those property owners would have to agree to that. And I think we did at least one rezoning along there when a property owner came in to request that when they had split zoning and wanted to do a project. So there has been at least one, but we typically don't do a mass, but we could do a mass rezoning and change the boundaries. Just would rezone the properties to that district.
Because it looks like it's just a very small portion of the backyards that discrepancy line runs. And it just seems like that would have been a simple solution to that particular problem that you mentioned. Or is there somewhere else where there's split zoning other than right there?
I think that's all that I'm aware of, although there is the large super block to the west. And when I say super block, I mean that there's not a typical block pattern because there's all those large multifamily buildings that have kind of been merged, I'm assuming over the years, merged properties together. So there's not it's kind of hard to develop those, and those zoning boundaries you can see overlap with that super block. So I think there's some lot line adjustments, of course, here that would probably help redevelopment occur. And I think a lot of those things are kind of outlined in the vision plan.
But they could only be redeveloped if you're talking about that large apartment complex being torn down. That's where you're talking, when you said that large, you're talking right off of College Street.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of buildings in there, so it would take
property.
a significant amount of adjustment to things. It talks about the possibilities. And of course, a private property owner, if the plan was, and the zoning was adjusted accordingly, there might be some advantage for them at some point to do something different there if you change the zoning.
Other councilors? Yes, Councilmember Cruz.
Thank you, Ms. Howard, for the presentation. One thing that kind of jumped out here right at the end, you said the city seldom does a mass rezoning. Mm-hmm. But when I look at going from the current code to the character areas, that's a mass rezoning of the entire area.
Yes, it was. It was a mass rezoning to correspond with the new zoning districts that were created.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So when we do this, what sort of notice does everybody get so they understand thoroughly what's being taken away from them for privileges that are protected by the current zoning?
There was quite a process if you're asking about downtown, there was quite a long process of public notice to all the property owners. There were 3 public hearings at P&Z. There was.
No, but when you rezone something, you send out a packet to the individuals.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
How's that outlined in our city code? There somewhere in there that highlights
notifies everybody? Yes. Mm-hmm.
what section of our city code outlines the process?
The process is outlined, I believe, in chapter, you asked me to quote the chapter here, I think it's chapter 14 or 18. It's the chapter that talks about rezoning process.
Okay.
Other council members? Is there a motion to, or, I mean, the referral was brought forward to see what we want to do next, so do we have an idea? Are we waiting till goal setting? Are we trying to do something now? Or what do we have that we want to do?
With the mayor having a veto, there's really nothing we can do.
How does that look from a legal standpoint, Mr. Rogers?
As far as I understand, this was a presentation kind of comparing the existing zoning to what the College Hill Vision Plan. So I don't know that there's necessarily any work to be done unless the council wants to focus effort. But I assume what'll happen is the timeline was just set forward, that year-long timeline, and council would approve or not approve as they went along.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councilmember Gamfield.
I think I would take a different approach. My perspective was that the whole reason to have this meeting was so that we could actually move something forward on the actual College Hill. Having rescinded the entirety of the area encompassed in the College Hill Vision Plan so that we could actually take action on the areas closest to the hill and redevelop that as a commercial district, as some residential add. This meeting was to be able to develop a plan forward starting now. The mayor's veto pushed this out to next July or at least a year, according to the timetable that we're stuck under now. If we had left that rescinded plan, this meeting could have developed a way forward so that we could take care of the ambiguity in the traditional code. We have $25,000 set aside for traditional code revision, but this council has said we don't want to push forward with form-based character districts like we did downtown until we get it compromised. And every attempt to compromise has been thwarted this entire year. So this meeting was to be able to say, let's go forward. And now we're backwards a year because of a veto.
Just a point of clarity, we've passed two things towards compromise. So, you know, there has been compromise. And there was also a zoning request brought forward by the church, which passed 6-1. So multiple things have been, I realize it's not fully compromised to everybody's happiness, but things have happened. So, but that being said, I'd like to, you know, keep this meeting focused on what the next steps are. So if anybody has any ideas of what we want to do, I realize we're kind of in a weird situation with the veto now and everything. So if there are positive ideas of how to move forward, or do we just wait?
Mr. Chair.
I'm open. Yes, sir. Councilmember Cruz.
My understanding is we, as a council, can ask the discussion of overriding the veto within 30 days. And at this point, I'd like to make the request to have that at the next council meeting to discuss that. That should be an item.
That would be probably appropriate for referral at the end of the
Okay.
council meeting instead of
Okay.
here. But that's completely within the, yeah, it's something that we can make happen. So, yes, Councilmember DeBoer?
My suggestion when I had asked for this was to look at, it sounds like the main part of the concern that people have had was in the C3 and the R4 area. So my thought was, well, what exactly is causing the difficulties in the C3 or R4 for development? Keep in mind, this area is already currently developed, and I don't know of anything that's currently being planned to be torn down. But I was hoping we could look at what are the parts of the ordinances that we currently have that are so bad that we need to make a drastic change. And that's what I was hoping we were going to talk about today, was well, what part of the R3 or R4 and the C3 really needs to be modified. And it sounded like from what the presentation, the one thing I heard was the one boundary line of the R4, C3 that went down College Street or the back of those properties. And it seems like that could be taken care of each time one of those properties was redeveloped. Because it's a very minute, small portion of each lot.
Councilmember Cruz?
And also to that point, I guess, I'm looking at the upper and lower hill. You have residential, a large apartment complex on the west side that I don't imagine the owner is going to tear down a multi-million-dollar revenue-generating facility to develop something to connect Quick Star area to the upper part of the hill. The other side of the street, you have what looks like 2 or 3 homes that I guess you could build an apartment building there with retail on the bottom. But that's been done before under this current code, so I don't understand the restriction. I mean, what I see is that people don't like the parking requirement. The thing that we don't talk about here, and it's kind of a lengthy discussion, is when you deal with this part of town, right next to the campus, you've got the commuters that fill the streets during the day, full up every single nook and cranny. Even the new Dakota Street that allows parking is filled right away with students. And then if you bring in apartment buildings that is proposed here to have 3/4 or half a parking spot, those tenants that don't have a spot in the facility are going to fill the streets unless we have resident-only parking, and that's been talked about for years and it goes nowhere. So we have this resistance in the past against modifying parking so that it could facilitate more density next to campus. The other thing that's been brought up before is that, excuse my voice here, kind of losing it, but there are numerous properties in the College Hill area, the old homes that had 5, 6, 7, 8 bedrooms. You can look at the parcel report from the county, and it explains there are roughly 200 bedrooms that are not allowed to be used in this area. And one of the stated objectives is to intensify the student population next to campus. And that's a given right off the bat. So, you know, we're sitting here with the veto, make a referral to discuss that. It's well stated what we're looking for here to improve the hill. There are, what is it, about 12 items that are on the executive summary, any of which of these things can be worked on. We look at the entrance to the College Hill area, a lot of things that could be worked on, but I don't know, this is an odd situation here. The consultant is saying that we need more population to support retail. The student body has increased dramatically since the 70s and 80s, peaking at about 14,000 in 2000. But then yet businesses leave the hill, and the only thing that goes into an empty building has been a vape shop or a tattoo parlor. And the reasons that people have left is stated because of parking. So years back, we had a clothing store on the hill, a flower shop, grocery store, what am I missing? Some other things like that. It was a destination, but then the malls came into play. And it attracted retail to go into a different environment than what we have on the College Hill. I'm kind of making a generalized statement here. It's going to be very difficult to come up with a plan for this downtown unless you just want to build apartment buildings with retail on the bottom. And Iowa City went through that route, and they have apartment buildings full, but the ground floor is empty retail because nobody wants to use it. There's many properties down there. You can go around and check it out. So the impetus here seems to be a way to build apartment buildings under the idea that it's going to enhance the retail. But if they're not parked fully, you're going to ruin the retail for what's there now. And only students that want to go there will walk in. Nobody will be able to park because the commuters are going to fill the street. The residents that aren't in the buildings, in the building lots, are going to fill the street, and you're going to have a dead zone. That's how I look at it. I don't know what the solution is, but density is not a good thing. Density is another name for congestion. I've said that many times already. and we got planning and zoning wants to promote density, and that's a problem. So how do you address that?
I don't have the answer either, but I think that's why part of why we were here, and we are in a weird situation. So unless someone has a specific motion or an idea to push it forward at the moment, I think the best course of action is to wait till the referral for the veto and wait. I mean, like I said, unless we have something specifically that we want to try to direct staff to get in front of council, we realize it's controversial. We're just kind of spinning our wheels again. And not to mention, the next council is going to have to approve everything anyway. So my stance is just wait and continue course unless someone has a motion to be made.
Mr. Chair? Sure. I mean, it's not a motion or anything, but I guess I'd like to know, I mean, similar to Susan's question, what are the big hangups that are preventing development on the Hill? Why is the sentiment from many supporters down there that we need this vision plan in order to fix what's broken about the College Hill? So, I mean, Simon, I'd ask you, I'd ask anybody, what is your thought about what's not working in the current code? What can we fix? Obviously, there's some boundary lines that could be fixed. We could make that direction to staff and say, let's get that cleaned up. And we have the funding and the timetable to do that, even with the veto in place. So let's presuppose that that doesn't change anything. What do you think is holding it up that we could do something about?
Things that I see based off frequenting that area, you know, playing at the Octopus a lot, and I almost go every day to the Hill. So things that I see are, there currently are a number of empty businesses. There's a lot of unfortunate cosmetic issues and things that look rough, not just on public houses, and people who own property, but also commercial property. And there's no real incentive, it looks like, to necessarily to start to fix it up. People are concerned about the concentration of vape shops. People are concerned about the liquor stores. So those are just the things I see off the top of my head. So like the thing that jumped out at me the most with the vision plan was, what steps could we take to cosmetically make that area nicer and more attractive, like what we did with the culvert, and what could we do to incentivize business owners and people who own the houses to do something with them. So those are the challenges I see. I see that the challenge as, like Karen said, the egg or the chicken. How do you push something forward, and how do you make something happen? And I think that's part of why zoning comes in to be talked about, is that with the new zoning code, we could give ideas and possibly do things. I'm not saying it would work, but those are the things that I see just frequenting the area, and I don't know what the answer is. And, you know, but I would say the first steps would be beautification and looking at incentives and things like that. I don't know. Kelly goes to the Hill a lot as well, so maybe she has some thoughts on it. I love the Hill, by the way, and I'm not trying to like talk down about it, but it does have its issues that we want to try to. It's such an awesome place, you know. It has such a heart, and I feel like, yeah, we want to uplift it in as many ways as possible.
Mr. Chairman.
Kelly, I think Kelly was going to go first, but either one.
Yeah.
And then
When
Councilmember Cedar.
I propose that for the parking concerns, I propose that if you have a concern with parking, I would love to go to the Hill with you. I would love to go see where your concerns are, because I go up to the Hill frequently. I don't see the parking concern. So I would love for you to take me to the place that you see the problem. Also, just to correct, we are down about at least 5,000 students from the peak of enrollment in UNI. So 5,000 less folks utilizing that area. So, you know, I'm not gonna, I feel like we are at a standstill. I feel like certain folks want the answer that they want and aren't, in my opinion, we don't listen to each other. So the first thing I would love, please, if there's a parking problem, I mean it. Like, call me. Let's go up together and you show me where that problem is.
I'll send you lots of pictures.
Go ahead. No, I want you, no, go ahead. I
Okay.
have time. I will take time off.
Okay.
You call me, we'll go up to the hill.
I'll
And
show you where the commuters fill the streets,
That's fine.
every spot,
No, I want to be there
every
with
nook and
you.
cranny. Okay?
Okay.
Councilmember Cyrus?
I think we've got to just focus on the College Hill area. I've never heard it called Upper College Hill and Lower College Hill in my entire life. I used to go up there when it was the cupboard on College Hill, which is now Hill Street News. At the top, there was the pet shop. But times change, but we need to focus on this small part. Starbuck Circle's mentioned in this. We're starting to get way strung out on all these different areas. We need to settle down and concentrate on just College Hill and get that figured out. And I think we could do great things there. But when you encompass all of this area, then there's all kinds of different conversations. So until we narrow that down, which we were trying to do, as Gil and I joke that we own property in the area, we've got to focus on College Hill and make things happen there. That's all.
I think, yeah, it's, everybody wants to do something, everybody wants to do something a different way. So, and we're in an election cycle, so it's tough. Yes, Councilmember DeBerg.
Well, I just wanted to go back a little bit here. The parking that you talk about, that was part of the big part of the vision plan was there's a huge portion in there about parking and about changes to parking. Perfect. Actually, I think that the overlay and what we've added in the overlay is what's needed, not to increase or to decrease the requirement on the parking. But the other things that you mentioned, Simon, those are all things we can do now. We don't need to have any kind of visioning plan. It's kind of talked about on number 1 on the College Hill vision plan part here, where it talked about open spaces, wider sidewalks, street trees, pedestrian crossings. We can do all that. We don't need any kind of additional planning for that, or not planning, but this vision plan for that. But what we do need is going back again. Let's talk about the C3 and the R4, and I really would like us to look at what are the problems that are that are the inhibitors to growth, and what changes can we make to those areas that would spur development? Because it seems like that's the problem.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilmember Ganfield.
Yeah. I appreciate you responding to the question of what do you see that's there. And I kind of agree with Susan. The cosmetic things, we can probably do some benefit there with code enforcement. Beautification in the plan is a wonderful part of that plan, but we can do those things today too. I guess I'm curious by way of a direction from council towards staff. I know we've had a focus for our code enforcement team downtown. I don't remember what exactly boundaries are there. And Stephanie, I'm kind of looking to see if we can deviate from that earlier. Can we move focus towards the hill for code enforcement so that we do get some of those properties cleaned up and get some adherence to our current code?
For the past 2 years, our proactive code enforcement has been working in the College Hill area. That walking and logging the issues and contacting property owners and working with them can take quite a long time. So we have been focusing in that area.
Okay, I was misunderstanding that it might have been downtown. So I guess I'd like to see more results, and maybe I'm just being overly idealistic, because if we've been enforcing it for 2 years, we have a very significant lack of compliance. There's stuff falling apart down there in some of the housing. So I'd love to see the same as Simon, that it looks nicer, like we look like we care about the area. I would echo Mrs. Beach's sentiments that we're better than this when I walk down the hill. So I want to see it cleaned up too. Parking, I don't have any major problem when I go down the hill to park. I get to get my coffee, get my sandwich, get my merch masala, no problem. But reducing the amount of parking in the College Hill vision plan was a concern. We aren't anywhere near everybody walking. And as much as people commute from the campus downtown, they also pop over to the hill from other areas in town. Our cars aren't going away tomorrow like we might dream. So we've got to continue that direction. We can't remove the parking. So I guess that's kind of why I was thinking we needed to focus in on that area as well. The types of stores, we don't have any control over that. It's a free market. They're going to put a business in there that they think is profitable, and maybe it'll fail, maybe it won't. Empty businesses, that's the same way, unless you want to talk incentives, which we may need to talk about that to revitalize some of those aspects, but that only comes with a consensus from the council that says, yeah, we're going to put in this type of redevelopment, and we've been split. And so this isn't at all to be argumentative, but Kelly, we have a majority on the council that said, hey, we don't want to do it this way, and it has been 2 successful changes and 1 overrule for a parking area, but predominantly it's not been a together vision. So maybe this is all just rhetoric to say, we need to have a shared vision that's established this next year going forward. I would have rather started sooner because this area does need some help. I would make a motion that this council at least encourages staff to enforce a little more strictly on the Hill on beautification and code enforcement efforts, if that's something that we could do.
I mean, that's a given. That's just enforce what's there.
I think it'd
that
be
would be
akin
to-
to strongly encourages versus just saying, yeah, it's something they do. I'm
Well-
saying, let's make it a top priority.
We can
Director
ask,
over
I
there
mean, do
nodding
we,
his head, so.
do we need a motion for that, or can we, I mean, I
It's just a
get the
consensus
sense that-
gathering,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think it's just, we're,
Yeah, and maybe we should clarify the hill. I should talk about, it was the neighborhoods that we've been walking, not necessarily the heart of the hill, if we're talking about the area right on College Street. So if that's what you're meaning and really wanting to spend more time there about the businesses and the residences along College Street, we can make sure we're doing that.
I'm sure you could benefit from a council that gives you 3 or 4 more staff for code enforcement, but we were cutting budget and all of those things. I would love to see the entire College Hill overlay well enforced, and I know you're making those efforts, and Adam is only one person, so, but that would be my encouragement, is to see if we can get those cleaned up a little more quickly.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Cruz first, and then Councilmember
Okay,
Dunn.
thank you. So this is to Mr. Rogers. I know over the years now, we've talked about nuisance businesses, and there's the standard adult entertainment, which quickly becomes considered a nuisance. Though that technically is a value judgment, I guess. I mean, some people would say differently, maybe. But when you have 10 vape shops, 10 liquor stores, 10 tattoo parlors, I'm just kind of grabbing a number. There's not necessarily that many. But what is the characteristics in statewide code, federal code, or anywhere that we can say, you know, a density of these types of businesses creates a nuisance? It's not pleasing to the public, or, you know, similar with the adult entertainment. You know, what criteria definitively says one is and one isn't a nuisance?
You're not really talking about a nuisance thing here, but you are talking about zoning. I know Karen's been involved in this before, where cities have taken steps on concentration, for instance. But it's a difficult line. We can't pick winners and losers necessarily.
Well, I understand, but I mean.
But you kind of alluded to it. Take a vape shop, for instance. We can't declare a lawful business a nuisance necessarily. I'll contrast that with, this doesn't happen in Cedar Falls, but a bar where there's fights every night and law enforcement coming in every night, that can become a nuisance. But
Or even rental property having calls for service all the time, right? It's a nuisance property.
If
So they
it's
define
bad
that in
enough.
other communities.
right, so what you're talking about, so that's not really nuisance, but there are steps to be taken on concentration matters, and I defer to Karen on steps that have been taken that seem to have had success in those areas. So
Well,
that's
I-
something
that's-
to look at.
That's, as a benefit of this meeting, I want to find out what we can do, whether Karen or Kevin or whoever does this, the concentration thing. I mean, and go back to the adult entertainment. If you have no signs, it's not flashing girls, 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 it's black, you know, and it's just a storefront. To the public driving down the street, they'd say, oh, it's just some, I don't know what it is, you know. I bet most people don't even know what's on the hill for businesses, really. There's a lot of them in some of those buildings that most people don't know about. So with that thought, the character districts that are, character areas that are proposed in the form-based zoning, they will no more control this than the regular traditional zoning code. Correct?
I mean, it could. It depends on what they put in the
I'm asking Mr.
zoning.
Rogers. Or Mr. Gaines, whoever wants to.
It actually depends on how you write the code. You can write the code to talk about those density items that you've talked about.
Then why don't we do that now?
We can. I mean, we can look at different aspects of how you want that written, or.
Yeah, but the thing, I've said this at the last meeting, and I believe that by putting through the form-based zoning, you're taking away administratively the property rights of people that have protection here under the R2, R3, R4, and it's going away. And that's a concern. It's really a concern. Particularly when you're saying to me now that a concentration can be solved if there's concerns by the public on vapes, tattoo parlors, liquor stores, if you want to use the word seedy, or it's a perception thing again, just like when we talk about prairie grass, that's a perception thing as well. But I think that's what I want to see coming forward. Not making a referral. If I need to do a referral at the end of this again, Mr. Rogers, to get this concentration language officially being looked at, or have a consensus right now?
I think, I mean, it's a good idea. But again, remember, we as a council stated last goal setting to not look at the zoning for this yet. So while last meeting we repealed and we set this meeting, this is the first time we've talked about it. So I think if you refer it, go ahead, I support it. But I would recommend referring it to goal setting again, because it's going to have to be voted on by the next council.
Well, the next council will say, Mr. Rogers, what is it that we can do for concentration of perceived nuisances? So I think that's a consensus we can have right now to say, hey, let's look at these issues here.
Sure, let's do it.
But couldn't you look at it in the current zoning? It's the same thing.
Current.
Yeah, I mean.
Anywhere.
Or what zoning changes would be necessary?
Well, it's not necessarily zoning, it's the language of what's allowed in any of the zones.
That's zoning.
That's zoning.
That's zoning.
That's exactly
That
what
would be-
zoning is.
Well, zoning is use or form.
Zoning is regulation of use.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
I'd add on to that if it's not the same thing. I guess I've had concerns, I've emailed you before about, can I deny this liquor permit, this, tobacco permit? And I'd like to hear that feedback as well about how we could, by concentration, prevent it from overrunning. So it's a similar topic, but in a global setting. I want to see citywide how we have some authority in that regard.
yeah, along with that, Dustin, is how many liquor stores per population in Cedar Falls? Is that a technique to control?
So this is just coming up on the spot right now, and so I'd appreciate a little time to look into this a bit and get back to council on some possibilities about, I'm hearing concerns about density of businesses on the hill. I'm hearing you. And so I can provide information along that way as well as the planners can to get this kick-started.
Because that's going to be a topic, whether it's this council or the next council, I would hope, because that's the comment we get from the public.
Yeah, and it was in the, it was in the vision plan as well.
You got another 10 minutes. The other thing I would like to talk about, if I may, Mr. Chair, quickly, is the resident-only parking.
One sec, sorry. I wanted
Oh,
to
you did?
jump
Okay.
over to Kelly before we get to the next one. So, Councilmember Dunn, do you have something?
Mine, it's just real quick. When we talk about parking, it's not necessarily, I guess my big concern is when we talk about redevelopment, I think we know parking costs money. So when you have parking available already, and then we have parking requirements, I believe, Karen, did I hear you say that some of those lots are small enough to where the parking requirements are kind of make it prohibitive to, maybe all the, it limits the redevelopment of those lots because of the parking requirement. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, so I think there is a section of the code you might be interested in looking at if you're interested in that question, because they did, consultants in the marketing and the economists did what they call a yield analysis. So they looked at specific properties that the community might desire for redevelopment, and they looked at the size of those and what amount of parking could fit on those sites and how many stories of building that would achieve, and what that yield analysis showed is that it wouldn't make economic sense for those property owners to redevelop their properties for more intensity because they could not achieve it with the properties they had. So one of the things that were in the plan was not to necessarily say we want to reduce the parking requirements, but how can we achieve parking in the area that's not on each individual site? So the plan does talk about what they call a parking sink, where you would maybe have a centralized parking area that those property owners that wanted to redevelop maybe there's a formula in the code or something where they could pay could park part of their parking in a shared parking facility that was a lot. It talked about using the floodplain area perhaps is a good place for some of that parking. So it's because the sites are so small that they can't fit enough parking to make it economic sense for somebody to redevelop it. Because you almost have to get triple the number of units to be able to make that cost effective.
Thank you.
Real quick, before we move on to other council members, I'd like to try to get this wrapped up in 5 minutes so that we can stay on schedule. I realize there's a ton here that we could bite off and chew. So if we have a couple things that we could throw towards staff to continue to look into like we've been doing, I would be open to that because obviously these are all vital topics that are whatever kind of zoning happens in the future, they're going to need to be looked at. So yes, Councilmember DeBoer.
Well, does Mr. Gaines have any recommendation toward that end?
Well, we're kind of looking for direction from the council, as I think it was stated here. There's not really a common vision on what this council wants to do, but we can go through and look at some of the different things. We can also go back to what are the original goals that the council wants to do moving forward. And so some of these things that we're starting to list off, whether it's parking or concentration of businesses or any of those type of things, we can put together a series of goals that we want to look at for the existing or a new zoning ordinance to move forward with. That way, so everybody's has this common goals, common outcome that we're looking for to move forward with.
I mean, I would love that answer. I think the issue we're going to run into is that the council split on whether to use the vision plan to look at that / form-based zoning or not. And so maybe narrowing down the ideas, and they would pertain to zoning no matter how you do it, whether it's Euclidean or form-based, the ideas are still the same, and it's how you implement them and how you write the code. So I guess I would say we could start there, because really in reality this council does not get to set what kind of zoning we put in place. It's going to be the next council because they are going to have to vote on it. So if we could just hold off on form-based or Euclidean and just say these are some common items we want you to start looking at, that would at least give you some idea of what's going to go into the new zoning regardless of what type it's going to be, if that makes sense.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilmember Cruz.
So I'd like to comment on Ms. Howard's explanation there about small lots, small developments, they're not viable. People build duplexes and fourplexes all over the city. Just because this particular lot here is perceived to be small, anywhere else in the city you can build a duplex on it, have off-street parking for it. It's very viable, tuck under parking in the back, build up. In that vein, we have problems downtown in the new character districts where the row homes or townhomes are not getting built because of the problems of trying to get the parking into these in what is fabricated by the character districts to the point that they're not viable there, but to the point that a small lot can have a small development with a duplex. It's just that they don't want to build a duplex. So anyway, yeah, and like 30 seconds. The resident-only parking is something I want to see staff give us a better definition, or not definition, explanation of why it's never been brought forward. We've tried. I want to say about 20 years ago, I was at a meeting, maybe it's longer than that, and they were on the verge of putting it in place. It was going to be a $12 sticker for the vehicle, and one resident stood up and says, "I'm not going to pay $12 to park in front of my property." and then they just dropped it. And that's when the enrollment of UNI was dramatically higher. But you've got the commuters that are coming in, like I said earlier. The apartment buildings won't have enough parking, so.
I think residential parking stickers is something that I'm accustomed to from other places, and it would be a viable thing. But again, that would be something that could be a referral. It could, I guess, it could also be in
Well,
parking
I'll
and
make
in
a
zoning.
referral.
But
It's-
yeah,
it's-
but
Staff, I saw Stephanie wrote it down, so thank
all
you.
right. Other
Appreciate that.
comments really quickly before we wrap this up. We've all at least got some common things that we want looked at, regardless of what type of zoning it goes into. So I'd say that's positive. And with that, I will now say that we will convene at the top of the hour for the regular city council meeting, and these committee meetings are adjourned.